an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue. Chapters 21, 22, and 23. Lies, Hidden Truths, and Delusions. In Good Company. And Good News, Bad News. In these chapters, the hunt continues for Skellen, for Larandra, for Naki, for Liliana too, Lillia, but mostly for those other three because we know where she is. And also, we find out that Lorkin's going to get to go home. Surprise! Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. I'm sorry, guys. My voice today, I don't know if it's like stress or tiredness or what, but I keep like messing my words up. I haven't had a drink. I haven't had any CBD. But yeah, I apologize if I start to sound weird because that was happening on the last episode and I was sort of hoping that it was just like that one. Apparently not. But Ashleigh's in the chat. Hi, Ashleigh. Thank you very much for rolling with me when I had to put this off one day due to computer issues. This episode is going to be a lot about realizing that I was a little bit wrong about the deal with Lillia. So what I mean by that is Lillia is... I expected, and maybe it's my fault that I expected this, but I thought we were going to get Lillia, the character with the heart of gold, but also like kind of naive, not really seeing through the very obvious, I thought, setup of her friend Naki making her feel like it was maybe potentially her who murdered Naki's father, and that everyone else would begin to piece together what had actually happened. And that Lillia would be the one being like, no, she isn't like that. She wouldn't do that. You don't know her like I do. I really thought everyone else would see through what Naki had to my mind, and if I turn out to be wrong about this, I will eat crow, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong about this. I thought everybody else would see. Now, granted, the only information that some people are operating with is the information that Lillia has given them, and Lillia is a biased source, and so she is going to present to them what happened and I put that in quotes because it's her idea of what happened, filtered heavily through her obsession with this girl. Perhaps obsession's too strong a word. Her infatuation with this girl. But there are people that I thought were going to be more critical thinkers than they are being. Now, Sania, if I am not wrong, she doesn't read Naki's mind. Am I right about this? It's been a couple of months since I covered the last chapters of this, so everybody, please forgive me if I'm forgetting some details here, because that can happen. I did think, however, that Sania read Lilia's mind, right? Ashleigh says, no, she reads both their minds. Okay, so let's say that Naki has one of those stones that keeps secrets hidden, like a Traitors dealie. Even if she did, Lillia has, in her memory, I thought, the moment in which Naki tried black magic and supposedly failed, even though Lillia felt sure that she felt Naki taking some power from her. Now, one would really think that Sania would have zeroed in on that moment, and the fact that Lillia really sensed power being drawn, but that Naki said it hadn't worked. And even if Sania didn't immediately go, that seems kind of weird, and, even if she didn't jump to the conclusion that I did, I thought as time went on, she would begin to realize that things just didn't really line up properly, especially getting to know Lillia a little bit better. And I thought, again, I don't get to hear exactly what it is that she tells everybody or how, but all of the circumstances of how it all went down sound so fishy that even if you just say, she asked me if I would kill her dad, or said that she wanted my dad to be dead, and then we woke up and her dad was dead and she thought I did it. You tell me that story outside of any magical context, and I am absolutely going to be like, all right, well then did that bitch kill her own dad? And it doesn't seem like anybody has considered that she did it. And I don't really get why not. Like, I guess it's just because everybody is so dependent on the idea of mind reading as being an absolute truth that the rest of the, potential possibilities get completely swept under the rug because that's just seen as the end-all be-all of deciphering the truth. But, you don't think that there's maybe a loophole there where maybe she has somebody else do it and it's not in her memory because she didn't kill her dad? Or, I don't know what can show up if it's not directly related to the question that you're asking when you read someone's mind and what you're pushing to see. And because I feel like I don't really get that, it seems like it would be easy to subvert the search, so to speak, in your mind. Ashleigh says, yeah, particularly when he's her stepdad and she only seemed to be with him begrudgingly. Right, there was already a sort of history there between the two of them that we had heard about, that they didn't get along. That he was overbearing. She talked openly about not really liking the guy. And I just find it really bizarre that even now, we haven't had a flicker from anybody. And we're talking about thieves here, okay? Anya, who really should be much more suspicious of everybody, talks about this with Lillia, and never once does she suggest it's possible that she killed him or had somebody, the only thing that Anya suggests is, don't you think it's odd that she thought you could have done something like that? Basically, playing a very emotional angle of if you guys were so close and she knew you so well, how could she think you capable of something like that? To which Lillia gets very defensive of Naki and is well, she didn't know. All she knew was what had happened, what she saw when she woke up, And otherwise, not Siri, not Anya, nobody has seemed to float the idea that maybe Naki had something to do with it. Even if we are taking the mind reading as an absolute thing, I just find that really strange. And so I'm starting to get frustrated here, because when we started this series and I thought that we were getting a character who was going to be an unreliable narrator, who was going to be so innocent as to not really see things clearly, I expected that to be offset with the perceptiveness of the world-weary black magicians and thieves around her. And instead, everybody's an idiot. And I can't have that, guys. I don't like immediately knowing what the fuck is going on. And none of the characters even beginning to catch up with me. That's not where I like to be when I'm reading, is to feel like I'm several steps ahead of every character in the book. It's one thing to be a step ahead of one character, because that adds tension and dread, and that can be really effective. And that was what I thought we were doing with Lillia, that she was going to be that one that I kind of saw what was happening coming, and I was waiting for her to figure it out, and I felt really bad for her. But when it turns out that everybody is just sort of discounting entirely this other theory, when they don't really have a better explanation, nobody really seems to have an alternate theory that is attracting enough attention to distract them from the idea that Naki did it. Naki presented Lillia as that distraction, and nobody really seems to buy it. Nobody really, in my mind, I don't get the sense from anyone that they believe Lillia did it. So, this distraction she set up doesn't take. And yet, in the absence of another suspect or plot, nobody is thinking of Naki at all. And the bitch ran away. She ran. She's missing. And still, nobody seems to think about her being the murderer, even though she fled. What more do you want? It's right there, guys. And yet they're all acting like, well, you know, who could it? Well, she murdered her stepdad and she ran and she blamed her friend. It's really not that deep, y'all. And I can't tell now that I'm realizing everybody else is a moron who this has not even occurred to. Now I can't tell if the author thinks I don't know. Did Trudy Canavan think this was like a cleverly shielded plot and that I wasn't going to figure this out immediately? Is this supposed to be tense for me? Because I feel really bad if that's the case. If this was supposed to be a mystery, I just don't really know what to do in that case. Then I feel like an asshole. And not like, you know, I'm not purposefully trying to be in it. I had thought I knew what we were doing because it seemed so blindingly obvious. And now I'm starting to wonder if I'm also supposed to be as bewildered as everybody else. And I don't think I am. I hope I'm not supposed to be. But now I really can't be sure what the fuck that, like, what she is intending as an author. Basically, these chapters completely blew up my whole theory about the way I was supposed to be reading this, who these characters are, and the entire intention of the author. And so now I'm just fucking, like, adrift, and I don't really know what to hold on to. Because up until this point, I had been very confidently saying that I liked this book a lot better than the previous book because it felt like she had got the ground under her a little bit. But if she intended this to be a genuine mystery and intended me to believe what Lillia believes, that's just not well done. And I feel like, I don't know. Oh, sorry, Ashleigh's commenting a bunch over here. She says, yeah, I think they've got such a massive blind spot when it comes to black magic that they can't wrap their minds around Lillia having done black magic but not murdered someone. Maybe, but the fact that she doesn't even remember it. And I like at least that Anya points that out, that Roet can make you do shit you wouldn't otherwise do because it impairs your judgment, but it doesn't wipe your memory. And I like that she at least points that out. And then she says, yeah, I don't know how anyone with 2 brain cells reads that and doesn't go there, so I can't imagine what she was thinking. Yeah, so this is one of those things where when I finish something, I desperately go to, like, the Goodreads and see what other people said, because I can't imagine that anybody didn't think Naki was the bad guy from the beginning. I mean, Naki just sort of seemed like bad news after, like, a chapter with her. initially I was kind of like, oh, cool, the popular girl, and it seems like they're going to have a gay relationship, and then pretty quickly you're like, ooh, red flags, red flags, red flags. And then she immediately points the finger, and that pretty much was a wrap for me, because it was too convenient, and she had already expressed some desire for him to be dead. End of story. So, yeah, I don't know. And anybody who's listening who has read these, if you had a different experience and you didn't pick up on this, unless it's a spoiler, obviously, if you can't be like, well, I didn't pick up on it because it turns out that's not what it was. Like, don't do that. But if you had a very different reaction to those scenes, I'm interested to hear it, because I don't really see how you read it any other way. And I just kind of thought that Lillia was going to be our precious little cinnamon roll who simply didn't see it, and that we kind of loved her for the fact that she didn't see it, that it was kind of precious, that her innocence was so profound that even when faced repeatedly with this evidence, that she wouldn't begin to pick up on what had actually happened. But like I said, we're dealing with a lot of people who have been through betrayals and setups and traps. And I just really would think they would all have started to see the very clear blinking neon signs. And it's just not happening. So I really don't. And like, when I look to see, this is chapter 21. There's 30 chapters. So there's not that long before the end of this book. And I truly don't know where we're going here, because there's an inclination to think that this subplot with Lillia is going to have to do with what's going on overall with S'chaka and the Traitors, perhaps. So part of me has been sort of expecting there to be some sort of link between her and what's happening there. And I don't know if that's like, I really don't know what significance Lillia's storyline is going to have in the greater story, because it felt like when I was operating under Lillia's just not seeing what the real plot was, I thought that the point of her storyline was going to lead to the realization that somehow Naki was able to get around the mind reading, and that we would have everybody beginning to pick up on the fact that Naki was the murderer quickly, because they started to realize that there was no alternative. And then they would begin to put together that, like, something about the mind reading didn't work. And that would kind of begin to unravel that whole part of their understanding of black magic. And now that it's gone on as long as it has, all I can think is that what's going to happen is that Lorkin is going to be the one that shows them that that can be unraveled. And it won't be simply using the... For lack of a better reference, I thought it was going to be kind of a Sherlock Holmes thing, where if you take away all of the rational elements, then all that's left is the irrational. All of the rational elements point to nobody else could have done it except for Naki or Lillia. And if that is true, then the only solution is that she can somehow get out of mind reading. Irrational, but that's like the only truth that remains, is that one of them is able to fool a mind reader. And I thought that we would just sort of, scientific method our way there. But now it seems as if Lorkin getting home and informing everybody that this technology exists, and I use technology as like a, that's just going to be how I describe it, because it sort of is, with there being like an actual object that does this for them, that he's going to be the one to sort of break this open. And Ashleigh says, to be clear, I only read the first book, so I'm reading these parts along with you, not spoiling. But I absolutely think Naki's mom was a traitor, and maybe once people start to figure out she's the murderer, she might seek out the traitors to hide with them. That's an interesting idea, because we don't really hear very much about her mom, but she's described as looking vaguely Sachakin. You know, she's got, like, darker skin, and it sounds like that is potentially where this ring came from. So that would make sense. I can't imagine how she'd find them unless her mother left behind some sort of information about that. And if so, I have no idea what her character's role will be in the rest of the story. Like, how will the traitors react to her if she does show up? Will they want to defend her? Will they know who her mother was? Will they remember any of this stuff? And if that was her stepfather, then who is her father? Because there was part of me that, like, if she's around Lorkin's age, she's younger, I guess, because she's still in school and Lorkin is graduated. She could be the right age for Ciri. And that woman, was her name Savara? I don't remember if they had sex or not. But that's the only thing that I could think that would really, like, tie her in adequately enough for me to be interested, is, like, because otherwise this is just, like, some sort of woman vaguely tied to the traitors who personally seems terrible and is a magician and just got sort of dropped into the story in this weird way. If it turns out that she's actually Ciri's daughter, and Ashleigh says they did have sex, so she's around the right age, I think, then that would make some sense, that she would be part of this story and that we would find out a little belatedly that she was, you know, actually had a blood link to somebody. However, in the end, I don't know how much it would matter because she's terrible. So, like, she's already committed murder. I don't really know what she not only committed murder, which honestly, in certain circumstances, I can even excuse murder, but she set up a sweet girl who was in love with her to take the fall for that murder, and that is just unconscionable, and I can never forgive that. And other than that, what is her deal exactly? This whole plot line, I really thought I understood the function it was serving in the story, but it's beginning to feel as if it doesn't serve that function at all, because Lorkin's part is going to serve all of the functions I thought this would. So it's rendered sort of moot in that respect. Ashleigh says, I suppose she couldn't be Savara's daughter, though, as we're told her mum died. Oh, that's right. I guess we could have been lied to that her mom died. But I don't know. Well, anyway. So I'm sorry to, like, talk for so long about that, but that's really, like, the main issue with these chapters is discussing Naki and where is Naki, and we've heard people are looking for her and yada, yada, yada. And I just kept waiting for somebody to begin to figure it out. And I really thought Anya was going to be the one, because she has a suspicious mind, because she had been betrayed personally by somebody that she thought had her back. And I just expected, when she kind of got a feel for who Lillia is, i.e. very trusting and gullible, I thought she would begin to see, oh, I bet this bitch took advantage of this girl. But that hasn't happened, so we're coming down to the wire here, and nobody seems to have figured this out. So, Chapter 21. Lies, Hidden Truths, and Delusions. So we are again with Lillia and Anya, and they're hiding in a bowl house with somebody that Anya knows and trusts. And Anya gives her some like worn out clothing to wear to hide in because her clothes are too good. And at first she's kind of like, oh God. But then as she puts them on, they feel really familiar. And she realizes this is how she dressed when she was a servant before she became a novice. And part of the front that she puts up is that she is a servant again. And later on, Anya will come and visit her and find her like scrubbing the floor and get kind of mad at Dania, who is the woman who like is Anya's contact at the bowl house. She's the owner, but she's like a friend of Sania's. And so this lady is the one that like Lillia is about to, or Anya is about to go to and be like, what the fuck? You've got her scrubbing floors. And Lillia has to be like, no, I'm doing this because I think it's a good cover. So Dania, says, I became the wife of one of her friends and he died some years ago. Can I tell you something, Ashleigh? I do not remember who this woman is. If you can help me out, I would be so grateful. Because I didn't want to like, I wasn't sure how to even look this up without, but this is said in such a way that I was like, am I supposed to know who it is that she was married to? Like, I didn't put it together. So they sit down and talk. And can you tell us how you came to be in the city, on your way to a meeting with Skellen? And she doesn't know whether to trust Dania, and Anya encourages her. Ashleigh says her husband was Heron. He was the leader of their little group with Sari as second in command. Oh, wow. Way back. Okay. Vaguely remembering that now. Gotcha. Thank you. And so Lillia finally tells them the whole thing. The only time she paused were when the servant woman returned with drinks. The wine loosened her tongue. She confessed to some darker thoughts that she had kept to herself, like the fear that she had killed Naki's father. Anya says it wouldn't surprise me if rot did make you kill him. And Lillia is like, oh my God, do you think I did? And Ari's like, no, I don't. I mean, it makes you do fucked up stuff, but it doesn't erase the memory of it. And have you had any since then? And this is a great question because I had been sort of wondering this myself. And Lillia says no. And Anya's like, do you want more? Do you like crave getting more? And Lillia sort of does a check-in and is like, no, I don't care about it. And Anya is really surprised and says it's not supposed to be different for magicians. And Dania says some people aren't as affected by cravings as others. I've seen it with customers. Some people can't stop. Others can. It's the same as drinking, though I'd wager that rot hooks more people than drink does. It's rotten luck if you're one of those people or their family. I am very curious what it's going to turn out to be that causes some people to have the reaction they do versus others. I assume that this is going to be explained, and I'm very curious. Is it going to be like an innate thing that you're like, it just doesn't have the physiological effect on you? Is it going to be an issue of some other like factor? Is it going to be that like some batches had been tainted and caused a craving that others hadn't? Like, I don't know. So Dania is talking about this. She says, her father was killed by black magic, but neither you nor your friend did it, which must be true because Sonia read her mind too. There are only 2 other black magicians, but the guild doesn't think they did it, so there must be another black magician out there. And Anya says if there is, Skellen isn't controlling them, or Lorandra wouldn't have been so keen to get Lillia to him. And he can't be the black magician for the same reason. And Dania says, Naki's father was killed after Lorandra was imprisoned. If Lorandra knew Skellen had learned black magic, Sania would have learned that when she read her mind. If Skellen learned black magic after her capture, she wouldn't know about it. Which is a good point, you know, like everybody has limited information that they're operating on. So she says, this other magician has been strengthening themselves because he killed Naki's father. Maybe it's a good thing the meeting didn't take place. What if there had been a black magician there and he was stronger than Sania and the other magicians? And I'm really curious whether, you know, assuming again that Naki is the one who did this, she took some power from Lillia in order to accomplish this, I guess. I wonder if she managed to take power from anybody else, if that was something that she figured out how to do, or if just taking some power from Lillia was sufficient to her purposes, and why she needed power from anybody else for the method of killing. Because I don't really, you know, I don't really know why they assume that whomever killed her father had to have strengthened themselves with black magic specifically. I don't remember what it was about the manner of death or the crime scene or whatever that indicated they needed to have done some. Was it just the fact that he had been, I mean, if he was simply drained of power, you don't need to be strengthened already for that to work, do you? I don't really remember how that goes. I would think you'd be able to do that while he was asleep and he would never even know. So this is when Lillia realizes that Sania was going to be at that meeting. And Anya has to admit that she works for somebody who works for the guild. And so Lillia's kind of like, well, what the fuck, man? Were you going to turn me in? And like, Anya says no, because I promised to find Naki for you and I don't break promises. She must be very special to you for you to risk so much for her. And Lillia gets a little bit shy here because this is getting close to the point for her. But later on, she sees an interaction between Anya and what's clearly a very salty ex-girlfriend. And she starts to put together that potentially Anya is either gay or bi. And then she sort of thinks, man, and if she is, I would be definitely down. And then she stops and has to be like, no. I absolutely cannot think of her that way because that will get way too distracting. And I was like, smart girl, because I know all too well how that works. So Dania tells Anya that you've got to tell Sari. And there comes an interesting back and forth where Anya is like convinced that, first of all, she shouldn't tell Sari. Then she's like, okay, I will, but he won't want me to break the promise to find Naki. And Dania's like, you need to find a way to convince him that Lillia is more valuable to him than when she's like kept around than she would be if he handed her over, which makes him sound a lot more ruthless than the way that Anya talks about him or the way that Lillia was like sort of picturing him. And I found this interesting because to me, I sort of like fell into the camp of thinking of Sari the way that Anya does, where she's like seeing him as somebody with inherent honor. And Dania, when she says you need to like find a way that keeping her around is more useful. And that did sound super ruthless when she said it in that way. But all she really means is, there's got to be a reason for him to keep this secret. It's got to be like, because there is a very real reason to turn her in. So you just need to find something that outweighs that. And that's the way that he should approach this sort of problem. So my initial reaction was kind of like, wow, you're making him sound like kind of an asshole. And then I was like, oh no, that's just like practicality. That's different. Unlike most men in his position, he has lines he will not cross. So they agree to let Lillia stay there. Then we go to Danil. And reminder, Danil is holed up in this fucking like love triangle situation where he's got a Chadi and Tyen just keeps cock blocking him. And I cannot stop laughing at how Daniel doesn't see what's happening here. Like, it's so clear that Tyen is still into him and is jealous and is attempting to keep him from hooking up with Achadi. And Daniel is just, it's like, at times he thinks it's on purpose. Then at times he's like, no, it's just an unfortunate coincidence. And I was just like, oh my God, come on. And at one point I thought that he was starting to figure it out. It says, we'll be retiring to bed in a few hours. Tyen's nose wrinkled. I reckon I'll stay up. I've been sleeping so much lately. Daniel felt his good mood beginning to sour as a suspicion came over him. He resisted the urge to look at Achadi to see if the other man was thinking the same thing. If Tyen stayed up late... Dinner time, Achadi interrupted, beckoning as another slave appeared in the main room's doorway. Are you hungry too, Tyen? And this, like, it sort of cut off before he gets a chance to really formulate his suspicion. And I was, like, bummed out because I wanted him to start to realize what was happening, and I thought he would. And then the suspicion that actually sort of takes over is the idea that perhaps the medicine that Achadi gave Tyen for his seasickness that causes him to sleep so much was formulated specifically to make him sleep because Achadi wanted to be alone with Daniel. Perhaps it was just a convenient side effect. After all, Achadi had said that not all people were affected so potently by the cure. Daniel had offered to heal away Tyen's seasickness, but the Aline had declined. Tyen was too proud to come to him for magical relief, not when there was an alternative. Had Achadi guessed this about him? I mean, if Daniel's like... If Achadi's giving Tyen tainted medicine in order to get him to sleep, and Tyen is trying to cock-block him from the other side, the only person who's not actually making shit happen is Daniel. He's just being, like, sort of handled by everybody else around him. And really, he needs to get his shit together and start to, like, make some things happen, because it's just getting very boring to watch him wonder what everyone is thinking and not really take initiative. Daniel has been flattened out as a character this book. I want the fun dude that I was so enchanted by when I first met him. And he's just sort of a clod. And I don't know what to do with this dude right now. And he even starts to like think about how like, oh, well, we're just going to be like friends with benefits. It's just going to be a little fling. Daniel felt a twinge at the last thought. What if it stopped being an as long as it lasts arrangement? Ugh, you guys haven't even hooked up and you're already starting to be like, well, what if it's a relationship? Daniel, you can't think this way when you're not even willing to like make the first move. Okay? You don't get to. So go out and make some shit happen and stop fucking contemplating things. Make it happen. That's all I'm saying. So we go back to Anya, and Siri is there getting the full story from Anya. And I had thought that Anya might have brought Lillia with her, but no. I only wish I'd known Lorandra had not regained her powers, Anya lamented. Then I wouldn't have left, and you might have caught both of them. But I didn't know if you'd be able to take on the two of them. I had to warn you. And Sania's like, do you think that she recognized you from the hearing? And Anya has to be like, I don't think so, but I'm not positive. She could have been acting, but I think she probably didn't, because she would have just, I think I would have been able to read that on her. And Sari asks whether or not Skellen could remove the block on Lorandra's power. And Sania's like, yeah, I kind of think he probably could, which I thought was interesting. I sort of thought you would need to be like advanced to be able to do that. Granted, Lily is not advanced and she was able to, but I still, or well, she isn't able to. She undoes her own block. which is sort of a different thing because it seems as if she was able to do that due to the black magic practice that she got. But probably she could have unblocked Larandra if she had cared to try. So Sania asks Anya, did anyone mention Lillia? Maybe she's dead, yada, yada, yada. And, Anya just doesn't say anything. Later on, Dorian is a little bit weird about it. And it's sort of like, I don't know, man. Something about that story doesn't line up for me. I just feel like she was hiding something. And I honestly was very pleased that at least somebody was noticing something off, because I am just starting to wonder where everybody's fucking head is at. Come on, y'all. It's just, everybody is so gullible. So let's see. I'm trying to find the next major spot here. Anya is led back to the hatch. Sania watches them leave, and then she turns to Dorian. Have you been introduced to Callan before? And he says, no, anything I should know before I meet him. And she starts to say something, and then a healer comes around the corner, and she changes it to, he doesn't have much of a sense of humor. What she's trying to say is, he's a fucking, heartless hard ass. But she can't say that. So they go over to Callan, and on the way is when Dorian's she seemed to be rephrasing things, stopping herself from saying something. And he asks whether Sania has considered that perhaps she's being blackmailed. And Sania's that's actually not a terrible idea, perhaps. And she says, but I'd have expected that if Skellen wanted to blackmail anyone, it would be Sari. And if he was blackmailing him, he'd have locked Anya away somewhere and threatened to kill her if Sari didn't do what he wanted. So they head up to Callan's door, and she can smell Roet through the door. And she sees that him and two of his friends and assistants are sitting there smoking, and is just disgusted at the fact that this has become so sort of normalized, that it can just be this perfectly respectable gathering and nobody thinks twice about it. And she doesn't even want to really breathe the fumes of it. She doesn't want to walk into the room, which was really funny. It reminded me a little bit when I was a kid, the very first concert I ever went to was a Melissa Etheridge concert with my mom. And there were women smoking weed right behind us. And as a little girl, I was just so worried about accidentally getting high that I held my breath a bunch of the time. And I think about that now. What a precious little cinnamon roll I was. So she comes in, and Dorian says, we came to tell you of a failed ambush we attempted last night. Sania glanced at him, and he returned her look with a shake of his head. I didn't really understand that exchange. He returned her look with a shake of his head. What did that, it sounded like he was trying to signal her not to say something, but I don't know what that was about. But they fill in Callan and leave. And then she kind of goes off and is just what the fuck? This is such dangerous stuff. And he's people don't see it that way. They just think that it's probably tobacco or booze or something. If it's that dangerous, Lady Venara has to come out and really say that. And Sania says that isn't going to happen unless magicians agree to be tested. The ones who use Roet refuse, and it isn't fair to ask those who don't use it to risk being permanently affected. So basically, we don't have any hard data to back this up, and we would need to conduct extensive testing in order to see if this is true. And we can't, because nobody would agree to it. And essentially, Dorian's you could have extensive testing, or somebody could just stop taking it because maybe they just don't have access anymore and begin to lose their fucking mind because they're going into withdrawal. I don't know, just for instance. And at this point, he says something about how her perfume is actually made from rowette flowers. And he says, I was in a perfumery a week or two back and I recognized the scent. So I asked what it was. And she's like, oh God, that's embarrassing. I should just throw it out. And he says, don't do that. And she looks at him and he's not meeting her eyes. And she says, you like it? And he says, yeah, you never used to wear perfume. It's nice. And then there's this weird moment where she's like, so what were you at the perfumery for? Were you going to be buying something for your wife? And he says, no, to see what I might get for Lillia for her acceptance ceremony. And he's, again, really weird about it. So later on, I'm going to just jump ahead. They are, I think, in her quarters together, and his wife shows up. And this is another instance. Look, I'm just keep on running into this with these characters of them being so dense. It's the kind of thing that just straight up begins to be unbelievable. Like, you know what it reminded me of, honestly, was in the Hunger Games when Katniss doesn't get that what's-his-face is in love with her, and she thinks that he's, like, playing along for the sake of the game, and it's like such a shock when she finds out that he's actually into her. And meanwhile, everybody reading the book is ready to slap her multiple times across the face because she's just so fucking thick-headed that she doesn't see that's what's happening. That's how I felt about this, because they're in her quarters and a servant shows up to just be like, hey, your wife's here. And they talk for another minute and then he's like, oh, I probably should get out of here because she's going to get annoyed with me. And she's like, annoyed? Why? And does she think I would get you involved in something she wouldn't approve of? And he's like, I mean, yeah. And she's like, oh my God, your wife thinks I would teach you black magic? And I'm like, Sania, sweetie. No, not everything has to do with being a magician and magic, sweetie. You're his old flame, his first love that he never got over, alone in your chambers. His wife is concerned about that. Come on, sweetie, catch up. This isn't hard. But it's not until he finally says, she knows that if there was any chance for the two of us to be together, I would take it. And I was like, oh, because he just said it. I thought he was going to be like, he knows that I haven't really gotten over you. I thought it was going to be something vague like that. Like she knows that the way that things ended, there's just sort of a sense of unfinished business between us. But no, he just says, I would absolutely leave my wife for you, and she's fully aware that I would. Oh my God, what do you say to that? You know, even if you did feel the same way, even like, let's just say she was already harboring feelings for him before any of this happened, and she was sort of like trying to feel out how he felt about her. He blurts this out, and I do not know what to think. I mean, and she kind of does it. Like, she stands there trying to think through the feelings that suddenly come up after he says this to her. And at first, there's just this like, oh, there's no way. And then she has to be kind of like honest with herself and is like, oh God, maybe I am sort of interested. And comes back down to earth with like, the man is married. He has like a full grown child. We're working together. Like, this is such a bad idea. And he says, "There, I've said it. I'll see you tomorrow." And he just gets up and leaves. And I love that she's like, that would be way too awkward. And after he leaves, she's like, oh my God, it's already awkward. Oh no. I just haven't noticed that it's been awkward because I haven't realized what's actually happening here. And there was a part of me that really did find that like amusing in its way. I don't know. And I'm glad that it's out there because I had already been on this page. So finally she's catching up, but Sania is just too much in her head. She's too much thinking about politics and thinking about magic and all this to keep an eye on just like the ordinary workings of being a human being, you know? She needs to come back down to earth and get a little bit grounded here. So, all right, let's go to chapter 22 in Good Company. And this is Lorkin working on creating this stone. He is using this magic because he had to be taught black magic in order to be able to make one of these stones. So he's making one that produces light. And we find out that this is incredibly delicate work that takes a ton of concentration. And it can be really volatile depending on what kind of function you are trying to code into the stone, essentially. And that there are some caves where they do this kind of coding, and I'm going to keep calling it that, where nobody is allowed in because any type of interference with concentration can literally cause an explosion. He was being taught how to infuse it with magic. It was also more dangerous because a learning stonemaker could easily infuse it with too much power or lose concentration. He could have been given a duplicate stone to use. These could create endless copies of the pattern held inside them. Speaker Halana, however, insisted that all students first learn how to create a stone without the help of duplication stones so that they did not come to rely on them too much, which I think is a good idea and will definitely pay off later, I'm sure. So Halana comes in to check on him and takes a look at the stone he's making and is like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Like when he gets it looked over by the queen later, she's like, this is a flawless stone, which almost never happens on somebody's first try. So good on you for that. And when she says, in a few days, we should be able to activate it, he smiled. And then she met his eyes and paused, then shrugged. Then you'll move on to bigger tasks. I'll check on you tomorrow. And he doesn't really know why she hesitates that way. But we find out later the reason she hesitated is because the way he says "and then" clearly indicates he's thinking he's going to learn more stone magic. But she is looking at him like, and then we're done. What do you mean, and then? Like, she isn't on the same page with him at all. And I thought that was like, when we find out how this works, essentially the queen says, we have made an even exchange with you. You unwillingly gave up the very basics of healing magic, and we voluntarily gave up the very basics of creating stones. We're even, unless you are going to voluntarily give her a lot more focused education on that. We're not giving you a bunch of guidance on how to make more stones either. And I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. Actually, that's very fair. And he seems to think so too, because he doesn't really argue. He's disappointed because he was excited to see what else he could do, but he doesn't argue about it at all. And I appreciated that. But it turns out that what he is going to be sent to do is basically be an ambassador for the Traitors and try and get them some allies. And this is like what he wanted to do initially, but he is very, like the idea of already being sent out. He thought that this was going to be his home for a while. And I think he'd sort of resigned himself to that. And also, of course, there's Tavara, who it turns out is going to be sent out with him, of course. That he's like, oh my God, am I never going to see her again? But of course he's going to see her again. She's going with him. So I assume that there's going to be a whole thing with the revelation of what these stones can do. And the fact that he knows black magic now is a potential strike against him. Like, when he comes back, I'm very curious what reaction everybody is going to have. Or is he going to keep it to himself? Does he have to tell them? It all depends. I really would have said that Lorkin would tell the guild that he had learned black magic a little while back, because he just seemed like the type to not keep that kind of secret. He seems to be pretty interested in his honor in that respect and upholding the oaths that he makes and the ideals of this crew. By crew, I mean the guild. But I feel like his potentially his loyalty might be split here. I'll be interested to see how he handles that. So, let's see, I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything else. Here it is. So there's a conversation between Anya and Ciri. He's very powerful, or not Anya and Ciri. Anya and Lillia about Ciri. She says he's very powerful, the most powerful thief in the city, got allies everywhere. So if your employer is in hiding and the most powerful thief, who is also a magician, is after him, is he going to be able to help me find Naki? Anya stopped and turned to face Lillia. He has allies too. Not as many, but they're reliable people. The rest would hand you over to him straight away. Lillia stared back at the woman. She'd obviously offended Anya by questioning Ciri's abilities. And this is when Lillia starts to be like, there's something going on between the two of them, because she seems loyal to him in a way that is beyond just being a colleague. And it doesn't seem to occur to her throughout this that maybe Anya is his daughter. At first, it seems she thinks that perhaps they're in like a romantic relationship. But then when she sees the way that Anya interacts with her ex, she reevaluates that, but doesn't seem to come to an alternate conclusion. And I'm trying to find the spot where they run into her. Here it is. A woman had stepped into the alley ahead where it met another street. They both turned to stare at her. She was tall and very thin, and other than a cursory glance at Lillia, her attention was fixed on Anya. Ayla, are you following me? Yes, I want to talk to you. Talk then. Privately. This is private enough. The pair began to talk quietly. Lillia was only able to make out a few words. Ayla said, I'm sorry, several times. Watching the woman's face, Lillia read guilt, regret, and oddly, hunger. The woman's shoulders slumped. Her hands moved quickly, and at one point she reached out towards Anya only to snatch her hand back. Anya, on the other hand, looked calm and attentive, but something about the tension in her jaw and the narrowing of her eyes suggested she was holding back anger. The longer Lillia watched Anya, the more she grew convinced she was seeing something else in her rescuer's face. She couldn't decide if it was hope or pain. Then the woman said something and Anya winced and shook her head. The woman suddenly pointed at Anya aggressively and said something in a low voice. Anya laughed bitterly. If you can find him, tell him he's a bastard. He'll know why. The woman turned to look at Lillia again. What about her? Is she a client? Should I warn her to keep her bedroom locked? Or is she my replacement? Well, she hasn't turned into a traitorous, thieving rot addict yet. Ayla whirled around to face Anya, one hand curling into a fist, but Anya, with the slightest shift of her stance, was suddenly poised and ready for a fight. Ayla paused and stepped back. Whore, she spat, then stalked off down the street. So, when she says, is she a client, does she mean like, what do you call it? That Anya is bodyguarding her? Or is she talking about sex work? I didn't think that, like, honestly, Anya could have been a sex worker. It wouldn't have occurred to me that that had happened. But she didn't really have, like, a specific deal that I know of before this, so she could have been doing all kinds of stuff. But yeah, this woman is obviously an addict who is struggling with having hurt somebody irreparably, it looks like, that she cared about. We were close once until she tried to sell me off to our enemies for money to buy rot. And she wanted money. And Lillia's like, man, you're as bad at picking them as I am. But she means it in a friendship sort of way. And then she sort of realizes, because Anya says, whatever, I'm over her, that sounds much more relationship-y. And that is when she begins to be like, oh, shit. And the fucking... she starts to be like, man, she is fine, though. And then, oh, but she can't because it's disloyal to Naki. And I'm just like, ugh, bitch. Catch up. Again. Catch up. So I feel like I've gotten to the end of most storyline. The main thing that I haven't touched on that happened otherwise is Daniel and Tyend and Achati reaching Duna. And it's a really interesting, like, the way that this place is, it's very water heavy. And there are a lot of walkways that connect things so that even if it floods, there's a way for people to get from house to house. And they are introduced to, like, the head honcho here. What is the name of the guy? I'm trying to find that spot. I've arranged for a light meal to be served, then you will each be taken to your own obin. And they're each getting like a little house on the outskirts of everything to stay in. Take me to Ashaki Vakachi. Oof, that's going to be a mouthful to say. We've got Ashati Vakachi and Ashaki Achati. Oh, God, help me. So Daniel asks about the Keepers of the Lore, and Vakachi is like, no, you're going to have to like climb up to that escarpment and find one of them. And so that is going to be Daniel's next major mission. And I think that's about all of the major things that happen in this section. Trying to think. Oh, we do have Lillia and Suri, and Lillia likes Suri more than she expects because he seems pretty intent on helping her find Naki. So that really like raises him in her esteem. And he's like getting the full story from her, so as much as he says. And then there is the little chat that Lorkin winds up having with Ivar, in which Ivar tries to act like he's like super involved in making a stone, but then it turns out that he's simply providing extra magic. I might have exaggerated my role here. I found that rather endearing. A few turns later, they arrived at the door of the Queen's rooms. The magician knocked, then stepped back as the door opened. To Lorkin's surprise and pleasure, Tyvara stood there. Oh, yeah? So this is when he is given his assignment, and she gives him a ring that his father made, a bloodstone ring, which of course does not work anymore. And he is like a little bit angry at the fact that if she had this means that she knows why he never returned. And she's like, the truth is, he never really just made a decision, oh, I'm not going back because XYZ happened. It was simply that things kept happening that kept him from coming back. And it made me wonder if there was something between them, the way that she talked about him. But I don't know. In any case, I found this rather interesting, and it's always touching when you didn't have a relationship with a parent to get a gift that was like theirs, you know? So I thought that was a nice moment. And I'm interested to see how that goes for him. All right. Well, I am all done and I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap up. Thank you again, Ashleigh, for commissioning this episode, for being flexible because I had to change the day of the recording, and for giving me information in the comments and telling me about what your impressions were as you were reading this. I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys who are listening are enjoying it, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.